Sam, thank you so much for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Since listening to your enchanting voice and also watching some really thoughtful videos of yours on Instagram, even around ideas like awe, I've been really intrigued to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you for asking me to be here, Mark, and it's an honor to come and have this time together to explore what we're doing and where we are.
So we jump straight in, Sam, with the question, is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
The questioning journey. I was always fascinated as a child by this idea of the curious child and how one maintains that childlike curiosity throughout life. And I think the question that maybe I hold and I'm preparing to start asking myself as we move into the spring is about, does the sense of wonder ever cease? And how do I hold on to that feeling of childlike enchantment that I remember as a kid and I still have the opportunity to encounter? Will that be with me for the rest of my life? Does that transmute into a new form of sensation as we move through our archetypes and through our stages? I guess, what do I have to let go of to move onwards? These are some of the things I've been thinking about as I reach my middle years.
Well, these are beautiful questions. Just with that initial kind of sense, or that sentiment around, does this sense of wonder ever cease? Could you give me some idea as to maybe when that began to formulate for you or became more present for you?
Well, I've always had this, firstly, love of nature, but also seeing the flash of nature in the eyes of humans has been something that has really tickled me. That almost that artistic approach that one is seeing the reactions and almost sort of constellating where one is through both that singular directness, but also when I am with people encountering the multitude of responses to the natural world. I've often found that an extraordinary kind of theatre to kind of emotionally geolocate myself within the realm of what is who am I, what am I doing here? And luckily as a child spent a lot of time in nature with people and with kids through a charity I grew up on. I was very lucky to find, took me out of the city centre. And I think that slight kind of juicy sensation of being in a place of exquisite joy, and always perhaps with a little illicitness in there, a sense of transgression, a sense of naughtiness. And, that can mean many, many different things, but also about proximity. And I think my life has been always governed by this idea of how can I get closer? And that might be nose to the animal path. It might be jumping the barbed wire fence to get into the river. It might be meeting the musician that I love the most. I don't know, finding a way of being in audible proximity. And I still get a wonderful sensation about getting close to the roots, as it were.
This is, there's a delightful kind of intimate sense to this closeness. Was this stirred in those early visits to nature, or where would you say, how would you kind of even track that desire for proximity or closeness?
The many formative experiences that I've had I think I've always identified as a little bit of a Puck-like character, that's sort of to the canopy born. But actually, weirdly, the kingdom of species that really kind of still stays with me, even though I'm mostly associated with birds these days, was actually fungi. And I do remember as a 9-year-old discovering a giant puffball on a family walk, and don't know how I found out that it was edible, because we didn't have the internet when I was 9 or 10 years old. And I remember bringing it home and cooking dinner for the family with this puffball that I found, and the 5 of us fed off this, giant thing. And that, knowing that I had fed my family, I'd provided for the family, was quite a sensational moment through something that had blossomed from the ground, this gift. And I think that those gifts I have been acutely aware of, and what that exchange is. It's, receive a puffball. How does one give back to Mother Earth in some way? I didn't think about this when I was 9 years old, but
yeah.
But actually, I think the showing up and being playful and joyful and singing as well are the sort of, a part of that rich exchange. So yeah, and there were lots of things about actually about food and the harvesting. As an 8-year-old catching a lamprey in a river in France on a family holiday, and the entire village going absolutely crazy. I wrestled this enormous eel out the river, and that had been barbecued by all the villagers, and those moments of where nature's kind of like offered herself up and created a sort of, I think those and many others have been those sort of wonderful places where I've seen the kind of wonder and the kind of the richness kind of appear, and maybe being appreciated for that. Yeah.
There's such a delightful kind of sense of aliveness to what you're describing.
Or deadness. He's had to die.
But there's something, I don't know, through the course of this project, I'm always fascinated by essentially moments, I guess. And you could write about theories about different things, but just even the way you described there about everyone kind of tucking into the mushroom and what that meant to you, or the eel as well. There's just, I'm just always so kind of heartened by moments where they're somewhat ordinary, right? But they're just, you can just tell by the connection or the closeness that somebody has to them that they're so, I don't know, they're so full of life, When
we started this conversation, before you'd even press record, your first invitational line was, "What's the story?" And I was sort of blown by that, because it's such a big question. We are both story seekers, and I feel my life is governed by stories. And when I'm asked that, I'm like, oh my God, I mean, where do I begin? A bewilderment of kind of, geez, which story for which moment? And I think that's a thing that I love in life. But also, I feel like I might start sounding like that old Ghana bench who just wants to bore you with stories of their life. But there was, it's funny, the thing that has just appeared in terms of those, and I think it might be very pertinent, and it's not a story that I would think to share or regularly do, but in terms of life and death and why we're here and the gifts we're given, in all the foraging experiences, one of the most sort of, as a sort of life of self-sufficiency and gathering and harvesting, I once took some young teenagers who were just on that sort of pubescent threshold, as part of the organization. I'd grown up and was looking after this age group at the time, and I'd been teaching them stalking and hunting, and tracking, and one of the kids had caught a pheasant, but it was still alive. And there was this moment where these three young boys, I had to initiate them through what it means to take a life. And this extraordinary moment of these boys going from the thrill, the excitement of having caught this pheasant to realizing the responsibility and the sense of justice, injustice, and what they had actually subscribed to. And the act was done, and this young boy dispatched the pheasant, and then we went through the process of honoring the bird and defeathering and gutting, and then lighting the fire and cooking and eating the animal. The reason why I share this is about 6 months later, the boy who had really been at the kind of, had done the act, died of meningitis. And that moment of seeing the look of death in his hand, in his act, and then him knowing that he would be the next one later on, has always had this profound impact for me on sense of every moment being precious, and how we reckon with life and the living in the present, because we don't know, we never know. And seeing the tragedy that is all around us, that we filter out, and also living with that proximity, has always been this kind of hugely powerful lens through which to see life, and to remember to live in kind of awareness of the sacred and the ephemeral, and also the joyous beauty, but also the responsibility, I guess.
Yeah, there's something really whole, I guess, about that perspective, or even that specific experience. Just out of interest for you, when you were aware of him passing, or even contracting meningitis, was that something? I'm just curious as to how you even process that in the moment, or in the first place.
Extraordinary grief. I knew his family. His older brother was a friend of mine. It was an enormous tragedy, and just heartbreaking. And the funeral and all that I partook in, was just one of those experiences that one wishes they never had to experience. And without sounding flippant, there was it was like a marinade upon the experience that we'd had together, of how it turned a threshold moment, a rite of passage, into something so much more profound than I had realized. And then it meant every rite of passage that I did, or I was part of, or witnessed to, like what the significance of those moments were, because this rite of passage, that I experienced something with that child, of him becoming a young adult that not even his family got to experience, and that sense of privilege, that the kind of front row seat moment for being in a place of transformation. I realized firstly what a gift it is, but also, how careful one has to be with these moments. And also make sure they are done as well as possible. Because had it been a messy one, or I'd not behaved with integrity or really honored what this moment was, I realized the legacy of what that moment would have had I kind of not done it properly. So it was a real reminder about how we do things properly and with honor, and make the right choices, because they follow behind us forever and ever. I know that one of the many learnings, I guess.
Yeah, but it's beautiful though. Legacy, I think, is often a word that's bandied around in quite kind of egoic in quite an egoic sense, but there's something quite beautiful to the effect, I guess, that someone passing has, or what meaning it can imbue things with, or what, I don't know. I think of an auntie passing, and just moments where I still sense her through my own acts and how that she's influenced me, if you know what I mean. And there's something. It's not a way of like kind of bypassing grief, but there is just how there's a continuation, and even just the way you've been describing some of your engagements there with nature, like there's a continuing cycle at play here.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of these concepts are wrapped up in every moment. That, you know, when one is in the nature space, you're in a constant experience of death and renewal, and the ratio changing at every moment depending on your season or the ecology that you're in, or the, you know, the species that you're looking at, or you're not looking at, but is absent. Everything is present at all times, depending on which story we're looking for, or, yeah, you know, how we're seeing. And so that, yeah, that's what perhaps why I love the nature space, because it's such a rich stimulation of every metaphor you could ever possibly want is there on a tiny level, but with the potential to be conjured up into something really profound. And I don't often find it is easy to seek out those possibilities outside of the nature space. You know, you have to go into the confines of the theatre or the cinema or the performance, or and where there are egoic constructions that have permitted the revelations to happen in such a way that they are gate kept or monetized or whatever. Yeah.
Just really intrigued by, you know, you mentioned the use of the word threshold, and even a conversation I put out today was had an emphasis on ritual as well. Just from your perspective, the significance of those kind of two words in your own, I guess, your own kind of relationship or engagement with life.
Yeah. Palpable. In that I was blessed that, you know, an unusual set of circumstances, and growing up I had rites of passage moments, as a lot of people do, but and mine most formatively perhaps was growing up in a Jewish family, and to honor our grandparents I went through the bar mitzvah experience, not with a religious sense, but a sense of cultural initiation. A profound thing for a 13-year-old child to stand up in front of 800 people and sing in a foreign language. Terrifying, but, you know, maybe how I can get up and perform these days is because nothing ever be as terrifying as that. But also through the organization I grew up, where there was a real reinvigoration of ritual and rites of passage, working with fire, working with sweat lodge, and also working with elders, and creating self-made rituals that didn't necessarily come from an ancient line, but borrowed from different traditions, and also invented senses of what it was to become an adult. I was initiated, and through my singing experience of being apprenticed to a Scottish traveller, was also went through an initiation ritual in that. So ritual has actually sort of appeared, whether I've sought it out or not, that has given me the confidence to see the opportunity for it, and to sort of invoke it at times where it feels it's needed, and to also perhaps avoid doing it where it might be sort of ungenuine, inauthentic. and how one approaches ritual and ceremony with playfulness, silliness, profoundness, and a sense of connectedness, and with trickster energy, and also with great reverence. And these are all the things that sort of, it's theatre ultimately, of course. So I look for opportunities of where it can be, and actually how I can bring it into places where you don't expect it. So the work I do with Nightingales is actually full of threshold work, by nature of it being in darkness, and we don't use lights at a lot of the points there. We work completely in the dark, and pushing people into places where they have to sensorily open up. And that's what rituals do, that they shut down certain critical faculties, but they also allow others to open up that are often slightly more suppressed. And threshold work is always filled with these moments of seeing the ordinary from a perspective of unusualness, seeing oneself in the unordinary way, in the kind of de-skinned, derobed way, de-pedestaled, the humbling moments. And I love that shit.
Can you, just when you mentioned the discernment to notice when there is a kind of a threshold occurring or not, and how it could be inauthentic. And I think I just felt some uncomfortable movements in my own bodies with how I've portrayed meditation at times. I'm just intrigued from your perspective of, does a moment come to mind of perhaps even with good intentions, but maybe then realizing there was something else going on at a moment of threshold?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are the moments that are designed, that are that you're approaching because of a gesture or a sense of passage that is there. So one creates the ritual to honor it. There's also the sort of, to indirectly answer your question, there's moments where you see the opportunity for it, and you're kind of having to like pull back and go, it's not my ceremony. Don't step in and take control. But God, they're missing a trick here. From the domestic place, from the simple blessing of food, through to the, all sorts of other places where we can create a meaning, or bring out the meaning. I do a lot of wilderness guiding. It's very hard in the kind of concert theatre space to do that, because it sometimes starts a little bit weird. But actually, the beginning of my concerts, often I'll invite people to hold a drone and, kind of commune on that level. But on the right, and that's a sort of a little thing just to break down. Rite of Passage sometimes as much to break down a sort of fourth wall, as it were, a sort of a boundary, a social boundary that's there, as it is to put one up to notice what we are crossing, where we're crossing from and into. When I do the wilderness guiding work, there's often about reading the group and understanding, if we're, like I do every year, I do a bison tracking adventure in the Carpathians of Romania. And it's hard work. It's mountains. It's dangerous. There are bears and bison and wolves and shepherd's dogs and things. And actually the shepherd's dog was an interesting one, because we encountered a pack of the most dangerous animal in Europe, which is the dog. And more people die out in the mountains from shepherd's dogs across, rural Europe than bears and wolves and anything else. These are not and we had a full on surrounded by 12 shepherd's dogs holding the back with sticks. And, that in itself was a self-imposed rite of passage, that we had to deal with fear on a really palpable level of thinking one of us might be killed. And how did we work with that? once the pack had left, about 40 minutes of being surrounded, we had to kind of like, shake off the impact of this. So we sang, and the singing just helped restore balance. And so often singing has been the thing that can both restore balance or bring about a sensation of connectedness that then allows us to move as a group into a kind of fresh sight. I've many little stories which I won't go into where singing does this sort of parting of the soil, this sort of creating of a force field of protection, as well as sort of like a letting go. That's, I think, what singing is for in many ways. So yeah, those little moments where you have to kind of create them, because actually it's a way of honoring the trauma that we leave behind, or want to let go of, or just satiate, or just sort of, massage. Yeah. Does that kind of help as an answer?
Yeah, but well, I always say that every response to the question is the response. But this is fascinating in terms of just, can you give me a sense of how many were in the group, or how that moment was actually experienced, if in terms of just, what were you even thinking or experiencing while this was occurring?
Well, there was 10 of us in the group, which was large because I don't usually do wilderness guiding with that many people, but it had swollen a little bit. And there's a protocol when you encounter a dangerous situation. And every protocol is different depending on what it is. Is it a bear charging towards you? Is it shepherd's dogs? Is it, torrential rain, lightning, whatever? There's a protocol. With the dogs, it's stand in a circle. Everyone has a staff, a really heavy walking stick that's also form protection. And you hold that out. And, there were more dogs than there were humans. Some were small, some were massive, some were the size of bears. The shepherd's dogs out there are built to destroy a bear should they come and threaten the flock, or a pack of wolves. So there's, they're killers, and they don't discern between us and a wolf and a bear or a lynx. So you stand in a circle, packs in the middle, and us holding a ring on the outside. And shoulder to shoulder, absolutely tight. And some people are wetting their pants. Some people think it's really funny and don't have a sense of the same danger. I am more towards the wetting my pants, but also showing my bravery. And we stand there, and it's about maintaining in strength and confidence in the group, because it just takes one to panic and run, because they lose their nerve, and we're in real trouble. So holding that, narrating that. This isn't really a threshold experience. This is more of a thrashing experience than a threshold. But in itself, it becomes one. Because the point afterwards, a lot of people said I've never had an experience where I've feared for my real life beyond the imaginatory construct of what might lurk out there. And actually, fear is a huge thing, because we don't live a life and, wandering off, the teachings from it. There's only been a few times in my life where more than a few times where I've really feared for my life, thinking this could be it. Ironically, it's often been with bears, face to face with bears, and all sorts of moments where I've realized our vulnerability and what a protected life, but then also in the meeting of people who live in places where that threat to life is ever present on a day-to-day level. And I'm maybe speaking more here on those who live in places of, nature abundance and big game. Spending time with the San Bushmen in the Namibian Kalahari about how they walk through the night and the day through lion, hyena territory and live with that sense of what an encounter might mean. And how do we reckon with that as comfort, dwelling, protected Westerners, but also with impending danger around us on a environmental level of the threat of our entire existence staring us right in the eye like a lion hiding in the bushes, but yet we walk on. It's a funny thing about how what we perceive as being a threat and not a threat, and actually what confrontation of that does to emboldening us, and also seeing the inefficacy of a lot of what we do. And
I'd love to know from your experience of it, even just your perspective of it, what the collective experience of song was directly after that.
It's about restoration, and there was actually song in there as well. So when we were in that circle, I did sing. I sang a shepherding song because there were shepherd's dogs, and I thought, well, let's take this situation and let's take a potent, a tragic ballad of a heartbroken shepherd to kind of see the other stories of what this situation we're encountering, because it's a human-made one, but it's also one that's directly linked with the beauty of that ecosystem and its uniqueness. So the song was there to kind of bring about connection to the moment, to not deny it, but actually the act of singing, of how that means that we are all in communion at that time, and then post that, where we sang as a group, was about equilibrium and about just bringing us into a place of vibrational collectiveness. So those who were shaken up could shed. There are other things we did. We shook. And this is what animals do if they have been predated. If a deer has been chased and survived, and they've had a really intense and terrifying life moment, often you will see them do the full body ridding. So we enacted that as a way of sort of bringing some of our nervous systems back into a kind of state of calm. So those are some of the things, and we talked about it, and we honored what had come up for people, so that it wasn't just buried, because I think that's what happens. We have big experiences, and sometimes we don't integrate. Complicated word, but how we can metabolize them.
That's I think it's such a beautiful, you mentioned the idea of earlier in the theater that people can almost be in control or the guardians of that spontaneous revelation. But in this experience here, it's just such a beautiful spontaneous response to something that is, so intense by the sound of it, even just with some people finding humor in a moment and other people wetting themselves and song. It sounds like such a beautiful way of just, as you say, almost tending to our collective nervous systems or interconnections that way. You'd mentioned earlier something that I also wanted to touch on, just in terms of the idea of rituals and thresholds, and that was being an apprentice to a Scottish traveller. Really curious, just as maybe a little as to what that entailed, and even if there's a moment that occurs to you from that relationship that might capture it?
Yeah, I mean, there were many moments, and I had 4 incredible years working under the tutelage of Stanley Robertson, a wonderful balladeer, storyteller. Last of that time of traveller. Keepers of the law is the term that they have in their community, of those who tended the old path. And Stanley was a wild and extraordinary human, like we will never find again, and certainly in these isles. And when the first time I went up to Aberdeen to begin that journey, I met him in by sheer coincidence at a folk festival, and knew who I was. He knew my path, and I don't mean because I had any reputation or I was in any way famous. I was a kid. I was 25 years old, and I just started singing folk songs. But he knew who I was because the Scottish travellers, like the gypsies, are deeply psychic and know everything that's about to happen, when it's going to happen, da 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 da. And when he met me, knew my name. In fact, he first visited me in a dream. And when we met, he asked me whether I had remembered the dream where he'd come into my dream, and I tried to avoid a circle of people sitting around a campfire, and I tried to walk past because they were a rather terrifying bunch. And this man had reached out and grabbed my arm and brought me to the fire, and it was a real wake up in cold sweats of what this was. And it's before I'd met him. And when we met, he said, I Samuel, he always called me Samuel. Do you remember me? I came to you in the dream. And so that was like, okay, fuck, I'm on a big path. And the first time I went up to Aberdeenshire, he took me out of Aberdeen, and he lived in the kind of council estates of Aberdeen. No money. He'd been made his money as a fish gutter in the fish houses of Aberdeen for 40 years, despite the fact he had one of the richest wealths of folk knowledge and lore anyone could possibly have. He was a sort of griot like level character. Anyway, he took me out to the Aberdeenshire to start this initiation on what's called the Old Road of Llanffannan, which is an ancient route, path where the travellers would take from the city to the highlands to go hawking during the spring and summer and autumn, when they left the city to winter over. And there began the initiation ceremony, which he called this as the initiation ceremony, and it began with receiving the ring, which I wear to this day, the keeper of the law ring, and then the imbibing of water from the brook to every time a new song was learnt about how one imbibes it, but also what the act of singing as a form of communion and invocation is. And here I'm thinking, I just liked a song and I just wrote the words out of my little songbook, and then I'd sing it. And suddenly he's like, nope, this is ancestral work. And when you're singing one of these songs, you are calling in the ancestors and you're pulling the song out. The songs aren't inside you. And I realized that every time you sing, every time he sang, it's a ritual. It's an act of devotion, of reverence, and it's fucking powerful. And when he sang, if it was these ballads, and they're big songs, they're not wee little ditties, some of them are, but a lot of the songs are 10, 15 minute long with 15, 20 verses and heartbreak throughout all of them. And he'd be singing and he'd be crying, greeting as he's singing, because he was so emotionally connected to these songs. And I had never experienced a singer to be so invested. And for those reasons, I'd seen singers have emotional moments in Wembley Arena, on their world tour, crying all the way to the bank sort of thing. Suddenly, this is a man singing because of the sheer beauty of the song and how it connected him to his forefathers and mothers and his community.
Wow.
Yeah. like, do I run or do I fucking dive in? And yeah. And the first thing I did actually was a couple of months later when it was warmer. That was in November. When it was warmer the next spring, I went back. I went visited quite often, but when it was warmer, I went back to that road where you could see where the old camping grounds had been for hundreds of years. Of travellers would camp on the side, and there's the famous old tree, old Cruvi, this oak tree, which is 800-900 years old. With all the stories lived in this tree. And I went and spent a night sleeping out, no tent, just on the side of this road, to kind of make connection with the ancestors. This is a kind of permission. I didn't quite know what I was doing, but I knew it was just an act of wild all night holding vigil in this place to just sort of introduce myself to some of those ghosts, as a way of sort of asking permission, I guess. Do you mind this white London kid, Englishman, to come and be, a participant in this? So yeah.
But isn't this? I guess a few questions, but there's something. I just love the fact that you said there, though, that you kind of didn't know what you were doing laying there, if you know what I mean. But I love those moments where it doesn't even feel like remotely like that I know what I'm doing, but I feel like I'm in the moment and I know what I'm doing, if you know what I mean. I even had an experience recently where I was in the playground with my daughter. It's not the same thing here, but a butterfly came to us and I put my hand out and the butterfly landed on my hand, and the butterfly flew around the playground 3 or 4 times and kept returning to my hand as I left my hand out. And I've never had a relationship like this with a butterfly, if you know what I mean. But all of a sudden I sense that I know I'm supposed to be doing what I'm doing. Or so, do you get what I'm saying? That's just what that evoked. But I'm really curious, what the hell was that like for him to have mentioned that dream, and just for what occurred to you in that moment of realizing that?
Well, there was a few things. There was firstly a sense of like terror, like violation, and then resignation that I'm not dealing with reality that I've grown up to understand. And there was something very Tolkien-esque in all of this, the sort of this ring that holds such responsibility and being invited into this ancient path. I'm like, heck, this is the greatest honor of my life. And it was then a kind of shedding. There was a sort of a letting go of everything that I'd done lots of kind of like study of folk music and folklore and what the tradition was as an academic sort of archival thing. And then suddenly it was like, basically it was like going to archaeology school and dusting bones the whole time, and being, told how this creature that we're seeing as a fossil once existed, because we can tell from the fossils. And suddenly I'm like bareback riding the brontosaurus. it's a little bit like that. I've never used that before. And it's like, this is what they're about. And everything that I had been taught was kind of wrong. And a lot of those mentors that I'd had as the librarians, it's just like, what the fuck do they know? It's just like, I'm like, how boring was my old relationship with folk music. It was so sort of like, it was such a taxonomical thing. So I suddenly had to like, actually the value system that we've imposed on folk songs about this is older than this one, this is more rare, this is more this is more that, this is bigger, this is more valuable, this is, it's like, God, no, I'm dealing with medicine. Every song is a medicine, and understanding how not just what its potency is, but also how and when you administer and why. When you don't sing and what you're dealing with, it's like, oh, these are completely different. And actually, the littlest silly little ballad, little love song, you know, that is not ancient. It doesn't have some extraordinary progeny and has, you know, whatever, all those sort of metrics. Suddenly, those are the ones that I found most powerful. Like a song that I sing called Lovely Molly, which is just a wee little love song. Lovely Molly, I delight in your arms, and it's many long night I have dwelt in your charms, and if ever I return again, it'll be in the spring where the mavis and the turtle dove and the nightingale sings. It's like suddenly this song I realized is like making everyone weep, and it's like this is value, this is power, actually being able to penetrate people's hearts. And so I realized that was my journey about, and that was controversial as well, because it sat in quite stark opposition to a lot of other folk singers and folk artists, and the tradition, the modern tradition, in many ways endorsed. And that's why I went on the journey of song collecting, mostly in Ireland, actually. I spent 15 years with Irish travellers, gathering as many songs and, you know, trying to rescue as many, you know, remedies and, as it were, and versions of songs before they all slipped into the abyss, which, you know, most of them have now, because most of those singers have passed on and they've not been handing on down the tradition. So I realized I was dealing with a living entity, not a dead, dried aspect one. And the Gustav Mahler quote, "Tradition is tending the flame, not worshipping the ashes," became my mantra. And from there, realized that, you know, okay, how do we keep this flame alive? And in facing an extinction, a cultural extinction, how do we sort of arc as much of what there is to take into the next realm? And I'm reckoning with that question every day today.
There's, you know, even from when you were discussing the capturing the pheasant and just ideas around life and death and tending to, and it seems like the way you're experiencing life in so many facets is so it's such a lived sense of this tending, which I find absolutely gorgeous. Just wanted to know, like, from your experience of that shift in seeing songs being sung that way with tears streaming down someone's face, how did that kind of change or alter how you moved in your own connection?
Yeah. I think it's this idea of what is the role of the artist, because in those moments of transmission, be that with Stanley, which came to a very sudden end when he died, and I realized, okay, it's like, you know, it's like losing a father, but losing a library. It's like, whoa, okay, it's gone. I'll never have learned a fraction of what he knew. And also then being with the travellers, hearing them sing, knowing that the next time I was going to come back and try and meet them, they would also be gone. So there was always like, what is my archival role? What is my sort of, you know, kind of seed gatherer role here, sort of catch these heirloom seeds, but also how does this mandate my responsibility as an artist, as a interpreter? And I don't have an answer to that, but what I know is that the responsibility with the songs is huge, because when you've seen somebody, I remember being with an Irish traveller just outside Dublin, I forget his name. He was a very old man, and we were asking him about songs. He had one leg. He only had one leg, and he started singing an old Scots-Irish song called "The Lakes of Shalin" or Willie Leonard. Very well-known song, in many ways one that's really kind of still being sung amongst the travellers, but it's a very old one, and it's a very tragic one about two brothers going out swimming on a fine summer's morning, and one drowns. And there is witchcraft and there's sorcery at hand. He drowned, and he shouldn't have drowned, but he was sort of killed through bad intentions. And this old man sang this, with no tune. It was fine summer's morning, really it's like it was blasted, beautiful, but blasted into just a sort of like a sort of old shaman singing an old prayer. And then he sang it, and then he sang it again, and then he sang it again, and he sang it 4 and then 5 times. And sitting listening to him sing this song, and asked him, why is this song so important for you? And he confessed that he had a younger brother, and when they were boys, he had drowned. And this song was his way of, through his life, of holding on to his brother and leaving his brother. And it was just like, whoa, my God, for a song to existed. He was in his late 80s, and he lost his brother when he was like 7 or 8. He's lived that entire life with that song holding that story. It's like, well, if I'm going to sing that song, I've got to damn well look after it and honor it. And every song in the folk tradition has got some story or another around it, because when I've collected a song from an old person who's forgotten, most of their songs, the ones they've remembered are for a good reason. And if you ask, you uncover, and there's always a good reason behind every one of those songs. So when I sing them now, and I can't always remember what every reason was, and nor should I, but I know that I'm dealing with something far more powerful than I ever realized. So if I'm going to interpret it and arrange it and put band to it and stand on a stage and make a career out of it, I've got to honor that song and listen to that song to guide my intentions with it very, very carefully.
There's something beautiful with the song, even with the shepherd dogs being a sign of healing, and then with how you were describing Stanley singing there, and just the connection to ancestral realms, and even just the idea of ancestral healing or connection kind of came to me as you were describing that. And then just clearly the intention that brings to your own, and connection that brings to your own performing or sharing of these songs. Just really intrigued from when you mentioned earlier around Nightingale and the use or the experience of darkness with it. How did that come to be, or what was what led you to that?
I love the darkness. I love it. There's a line that I wrote in a recent song that which was a reinterpretation of a song, which is a song about pilgrimage, but it's let darkness restore us as seers. And that for me has always been that our eyes have blinded us, and we have been led into such trickery through the things that we have allowed to take control of our eyes. You know what I'm talking about here. We all know what we're talking about here. So when one does wilderness work and nature connection work, the fun starts when you're blindfolded, because then the other senses go, hurrah, right, I'm in control now. And, they don't. They actually go, ah, in most people. I go, hurrah, because I see people become real humans. And I do a lot of exercises that involve blindfolding people out on the land, and, safely and guided. But when we're with the Nightingales, the time of day does that work for us. Time of night does that work for us, and I lead people into that. There's a lovely poem that I've just come across in the last couple of years that I read out before we start the journey. It's about 11 o'clock when we walk, about 40 minutes, 40 of us or 60 of us, like a snake, single file through the forest, in total silence. And it's a very short little Wendell Berry poem that goes, to go in the dark where the light is to know the light. To know the dark, go without sight. And there you will find the dark blooms and sings, and is travelled by dark feet and dark wings. And it's such a juicy little thing. And it's such a great little gift to the terrified audience about what they're about to do, to just invite what in is this absolute privilege to walk like ancients, as we've done for tens, hundreds of thousands of years as a species, to walk in the dark, seeing everything, sometimes seeing deeper and further, because we are so able to activate our other senses, the numerous other senses that we have, not just the obvious ones. Some say there's 42 senses that we have capacities over, and that we limit ourselves in the way we articulate or count senses. And what happens in that work, even though everyone's like, we're going to go see the Nightingale, for most people, the walk in the dark to get there, that meditation, that is the activation. That is where people take the story that we've been telling about the Nightingale, their journey, extinction of this bird, all the threats, all the pain, all the joy, and all their fears of their future, all the grief they're carrying. That's where in that meditation and that passage, that pilgrimage, that's where the activation happens, when we meet the Nightingale and we sit right next to this bird, singing so loudly our ears are throbbing, this dowsing of birdsong, and then them singing with the musician and going to this incredible collaboration. It's just it's one threshold after another. And you use the word, it's the first time we've used it in this conversation. It's a work of healing. And so much of the pain that we're carrying and the loss that people are feeling, and everyone's carrying something, comes into such beautiful proximity and tenderness. So this is the work. I've taken a very obvious thing and I've just done it slightly differently. There are other Nightingale walks that one can go on, and I know the people who places they run it, like Net Rewilding State, and they're brilliant. But you walk in the dark with flashlights, talking about the Nightingale, and when you get there, you stop and you sit next to them and you go into silence. And it's like I do totally the opposite. We're silence to the Nightingale, and then we go into a kind of musical expression. And I feel like that's how nature should be. We should be in conversation with nature. We should be in communion, and we have so much to learn and so much to say and discover. And it's such a powerful thing when we learn how to do that ancient practice of conversing. I'm not a nature conservationist. I'm a nature conversationalist.
Yeah, I just, there's so many things you point to that resonate in terms of just, and clearly point to just the lived experience of life, and the inherent wisdom of paying attention to that present experience can entail, whether that's even from catching an eel when you're younger, or the thinking or just reflecting on the giant mushroom and feeding a family, and just these moments of connection, these moments of appreciating the cycles of life, whether it's giving and receiving, birth and death, thresholds and rituals, and beautiful ideas around just even how you talk about tending to a flame of tradition. I'm really intrigued, Sam, to ask you the question of what is a good life for you?
The good life is never being too sure. Yeah. I have many lengthy, wordy answers I could try and give, but just living in the unknown and relishing that ever sense of possibility that there's a really good story about to happen. That's a good life.
Well, Sam, as you've clearly evidenced in this conversation, you are you are paying attention to those stories that are emerging and also collecting them as well. And so I'm deeply grateful, man, for you joining us on the What is a Good Life podcast today. That was just like an intoxicating breath of fresh air, to be honest.
Mark, thank you. You hold beautiful space, and yeah, I really appreciate you inviting me and making time for this and bringing people in to listen to these stories. Thank you.